My parents charged me rent at 16 and promised every dollar was for my future, then gave my sister a $462,000 house for free. So I opened the records they never wanted me to see. When I was 16, my parents started charging me $350 a month to sleep in the bedroom I had grown up in. They called it a lesson in responsibility and promised every dollar was being saved for my future. 11 years later, they handed my younger sister the keys to a 4-bedroom house at a family barbecue and told everyone they had always believed children deserved a strong start. Then my father asked me to smile for the photo. I did not scream. I did not knock the keys out of my sister's hand. I asked one question about the address, went home, and opened a folder I had carried through 4 apartments. Inside it were 73 rent receipts, an old email from my father, and a handwritten ledger my mother had forgotten existed. Why had they kept such careful records if the money was never meant to come back to me? And why was the new house sitting on land that had once belonged to my grandmother? My name is Leah. I am 29 now, and my sister Sophie is 26. Growing up, I did not think of Sophie as the favorite because my parents never used that word. They preferred words like sensitive, artistic, and still finding herself. I was dependable, practical, and mature for my age. In my family, those sounded like compliments until I realized they were job descriptions. My father, Mark, managed a building supply warehouse. My mother, Denise, worked 3 days a week at a dental office. We were not poor, but money was discussed like a storm cloud that could appear without warning. When the water heater broke, my father told me exactly what it cost. When Sophie's dance team needed new uniforms, my mother quietly put the charge on a card. At 16, I took a weekend job at a grocery store. I was proud of the first paycheck, which was $286 after taxes. I planned to buy a refurbished laptop and save the rest for community college. 2 days later, my parents called me to the kitchen table. My father had printed a 1-page agreement titled Adult Contribution Plan. He said, "Leah, now that you earn money, you need to understand what life costs." I reminded him that I was 16, not an adult. My mother said, "That is exactly why this lesson will help you before the real world hits." The agreement required $350 on the first of every month, plus 1/3 of the household internet bill. If I was late, they would add $25. I asked how I was supposed to pay more than one full paycheck while attending school. My father told me to request extra shifts. Then my mother made the promise that kept me cooperative. She said, "We are not spending it, Leah. We will keep it for your education or your first apartment. Think of it as forced savings." My father repeated that promise in an email after I asked for something in writing. His exact sentence was that my contributions would create a launch fund, so I would never expect a free ride. I printed the email at the school library and put it in a blue folder. For the next 25 months, I worked Friday evenings, most Saturdays, and Sunday mornings. I missed football games, birthday parties, and a senior trip to Chicago. My grades stayed high enough for a partial scholarship, but not high enough for the full academic award my counselor thought I could have earned without the work schedule. Sophie was 13 when my rent started. She got an allowance for feeding the dog. When she turned 16, she worked at an ice cream shop for 6 weeks and quit because the manager scheduled her during homecoming preparations. My parents did not charge her rent. When I challenged the difference, my father said, "Sophie is not wired like you. Pressure motivates you, but it overwhelms her." My mother added, "You should be proud that we can trust you with responsibility." I hated that sentence. It made every unfair demand sound like an award. By graduation, I had paid $8,750 in rent and fees. My blue folder contained a receipt for every cash payment because my father insisted on documentation. The ledger was my mother's contribution. She wrote the payment date, amount, and running balance in a small green notebook. On the cover, she had written, "Leah Future Fund." I received a scholarship that covered about 40% of tuition at a state university. When the first bill arrived, I asked my parents for the launch fund. My father looked surprised, then said family expenses had been higher than expected. He claimed the money was temporarily tied up. My mother said, "We will settle it after Christmas. For now, take the federal loan." Christmas passed. Then spring break passed. Every time I asked, they changed the date. Finally, my father told me the rent had paid for food, utilities, and the car insurance required for me to drive to work. I showed him his email. He said, "Circumstances change. You lived here and you received value. Stop acting as if we robbed you." That was the first time I understood the promise had never protected me. It had only kept me from resisting. I finished school in 5 years because I worked 30 hours a week and took lighter course loads. I graduated with a degree in construction management and $41,300 in student loans. I found a job with a commercial contractor, moved 3 hours away, and built a stable life one spreadsheet at a time. Sophie tried college twice. My parents paid both times. She left the first program after 1 semester and the second after 8 months. I did not resent her for struggling. I resented that my parents called her tuition exploration while mine was a luxury I had chosen. At 24, Sophie moved back into my parents' house. She paid no rent. At 25, she started selling handmade candles online. My mother described her as a business owner, even though my father covered the website, supplies, and shipping losses. I reduced contact because every family dinner followed the same pattern. My parents praised Sophie's potential, listed my accomplishments as evidence that hardship had benefited me, and then asked why I was distant. The year before the barbecue, my parents had tested the same logic in smaller ways. Sophie needed $4,800 to replace her car's transmission, so my father paid the repair and called it an emergency. 3 months later, my own car was damaged by a driver who ran a red light. I had insurance, but the deductible and rental cost came to $1,650. My mother told me that adults planned for setbacks and suggested I pause my retirement contributions. At Thanksgiving, Sophie mentioned that my parents had also paid 6 months of her health insurance. I made the mistake of asking whether they expected repayment. My father put down his fork and said, "Why do you keep a scoreboard against your own sister?" I told him I did not want Sophie to suffer. I wanted them to stop pretending the rules had ever been equal. My mother said, "Equal does not always mean identical. We gave you what you needed, which was discipline. We give Sophie what she needs, which is support." I asked what either of them had ever needed from Sophie. No one answered. Sophie stared at her plate, and I felt guilty for putting her in the middle. That guilt was useful to my parents. They could make a choice that favored her, then accuse me of hurting her if I named it. 2 months later, my father asked me for a copy of my pay statement. He claimed he was comparing benefit packages for Sophie's future. When I refused, he became irritated and said, "Families should be transparent about finances." I almost laughed. The man who had never shown me where my teenage rent went was demanding to know my salary. I began keeping communication in writing. It was not a strategy for a lawsuit. I simply noticed that my parents were kinder in text, where their words could be saved, than they were on the phone. That habit later gave Priya a clean timeline of their promises and contradictions. The barbecue happened in June, 4 years after I graduated. My parents invited 30 relatives to celebrate their 30th anniversary. Halfway through lunch, my father tapped a glass and called Sophie forward. My mother held up a ring of keys tied with a yellow ribbon. She announced, "Every child deserves a safe place to begin adulthood, and we are so happy to give Sophie her forever home." People clapped. Sophie cried. My father revealed a poster showing a renovated blue house at 1847 Maple Ridge Road. The mortgage was paid off. My parents had purchased it through a family trust and transferred it to Sophie as a gift. My aunt whispered, "That must have cost almost $500,000. The county sale price was later recorded as $462,000. My father gestured for me to stand beside Sophie. He said, "Come on, Leah. We need both daughters in the picture." I asked, "Is Maple Ridge the parcel behind Grandma Evelyn's old orchard?" My father's smile changed for less than a second. He said, "It used to be part of the property, years ago." My mother quickly told everyone the cake was melting. That tiny reaction mattered because Grandma Evelyn, my father's mother, had died when I was 19. She owned 12 acres, including an old farmhouse and orchard. She had often told Sophie and me that the land would help both of us someday. After her death, my father said the farmhouse was sold to cover medical debts and taxes. I believed him because I was a college freshman trying to survive statistics and 2 part-time jobs. I congratulated Sophie, posed for one photo, and left before dessert. At home, I searched the county property database. Maple Ridge was a new subdivision carved from Grandma's land. The specific lot under Sophie's house had passed through an entity called EWD Family Holdings, with my father listed as manager. The next morning, I retrieved the blue folder. Tucked behind the receipts was the green ledger. My mother had given it to me accidentally when she packed my room after college. I had never examined the final pages closely. The first 25 entries showed my payments. After that, the handwriting continued with transfers labeled Evelyn Property Tax, Survey and Attorney. My $8,750 had not merely disappeared into groceries. At least $6,400 had been moved into expenses connected to Grandma's land. I requested probate records from the county. Grandma's will had created a trust. My father was trustee. The trust directed him to maintain the property, then divide net sale proceeds equally between his 2 children, or, if he chose, preserve equivalent property interests for their benefit. His 2 children meant my father and my Aunt Carla, not Sophie and me. That initially seemed like a dead end. Then Aunt Carla called after receiving my message. Carla told me she had signed away her half because my father claimed the property was underwater. He paid her $18,000 and showed her a summary listing medical liens, back taxes, and demolition costs. She had never seen the final sales records. I sent her the subdivision documents. She was quiet for almost a minute. Then Carla said, "Leah, that land sold in phases for more than $900,000. Mark told me there would be nothing left." Carla still had Grandma's original trust binder. A schedule attached to it listed the orchard parcel separately. Beside that parcel, Grandma had handwritten that its proceeds should establish education or housing funds for Leah and Sophie. The note was not enough by itself to rewrite the trust, but it contradicted my father's claim that Grandma intended Sophie alone to benefit. More importantly, Carla's binder contained annual accounting requirements. As a beneficiary, she was entitled to detailed statements. My father had never provided them. I hired a trust attorney named Priya Shah. I gave Priya the probate file, property records, rent receipts, email, and green ledger. Priya warned me that my personal promise claim might be complicated by time limits and the informal arrangement. Carla's trust claim, however, was current because my father had concealed transactions and never closed the trust properly. Priya said, "Your documents do not prove every allegation yet, but they are more than enough to demand an accounting." We did not sue immediately. Priya sent my father a formal request on Carla's behalf. It demanded bank statements, closing files, tax returns, trust expenses, and records for EWD Family Holdings. My parents called me 17 times that day. When I finally answered, my mother said, "How could you involve a lawyer over a gift to your sister?" I replied, "The request concerns Grandma's trust, not Sophie's birthday present. If the accounting is clean, you can provide it." My father said, "Carla does not understand finances. You manipulated her because you are jealous." I asked why the green ledger showed my rent-paying orchard expenses. He went silent. My mother then claimed she had used shorthand and the labels meant nothing. 2 days later, Sophie called me crying. She said our parents had told her I was trying to take her home and leave her homeless. I told Sophie, "I have not filed a claim against you or the house. I am asking Dad to account for Grandma's property. Please get your own lawyer before you sign anything." Sophie accused me of ruining the first good thing that had happened to her. I understood her fear, but I would not accept the role my parents had written for me. I emailed her the demand letter so she could see what it actually said. My father responded by producing a 2-page accounting prepared on a spreadsheet. It listed $611,000 in property sales and nearly $570,000 in expenses. Priya immediately noticed $143,000 labeled development management fees paid to my father's company, even though his company had never developed property. Another $96,000 was listed as family loans with no dates or borrowers. The house gifted to Sophie did not appear anywhere. Priya sought a court-ordered accounting. Once the petition became real, my father's confidence cracked. The court appointed an independent accountant to trace the trust assets. The accountant found total land sale proceeds of $934,700. Legitimate debts and taxes were about $214,000. My father had distributed $18,000 to Carla, transferred $275,000 into his own retirement and mortgage accounts, spent roughly $52,000 on personal vehicles and vacations, and placed $375,000 into the purchase and renovation of Sophie's house. The remaining money had been consumed by legal fees, transfers, and smaller personal expenses. My parents had added some of their own savings to finish the house, but the free gift was mostly Grandma's land disguised as their generosity. The accountant also confirmed that $6,400 from my teenage rent payments had been deposited into the same property account. That amount was small compared with the trust breach, but emotionally, it was the clearest proof. My parents had taken money from a teenager, promised to save it for her launch, used it to preserve an inherited asset, and later presented that asset to the other daughter as a gift from themselves. The accounting revealed one more detail that explained my father's panic at the barbecue. 3 weeks before the party, he had applied for a home equity line on the house he was giving Sophie. The lender's title review asked how EWD Family Holdings had acquired the underlying lot. Instead of answering, my father withdrew the application. He knew the chain of money might be examined, so he rushed the transfer to Sophie and staged the public announcement before Carla or I understood what the property was. Priya believed the ceremony was meant to create emotional protection. Once dozens of relatives had watched Sophie receive the keys, any challenge could be described as taking a home from her, rather than tracing assets from a trust. My father had turned a legal question into a loyalty test before we even knew there was a question. During a recorded deposition, Carla's attorney asked my father why he had told Carla the land was nearly worthless. My father said development value was impossible to predict. The attorney then showed him an email from a builder dated 4 months before Carla signed her release. In it, the builder offered $710,000 for the full tract, subject to zoning approval. My father claimed he did not remember the offer. The attorney asked why he had forwarded that same email to my mother with the message that they had finally hit the jackpot. My father's attorney requested a break. My mother was questioned separately. She admitted writing the Green Ledger, but said she had never understood the trust. When asked why she labeled my money as Leah Future Fund, she replied, "That was motivational language." Priya repeated the phrase slowly. My mother then tried to explain that saving me from entitlement was itself an investment in my future. Even my father's attorney looked down at the table. After the depositions, my parents offered me $8,750 if Carla dropped her claim. They described it as returning every penny I had paid. The offer included a confidentiality clause, a statement that all trust decisions had been proper, and a requirement that I publicly congratulate Sophie on the house. I rejected it. I told Priya that repayment without the truth would simply buy them another version of the family photograph they wanted. My parents increased the pressure. My mother contacted my employer's public reception line and left a message saying I was experiencing a family crisis and making unstable accusations. Because I had already told my supervisor that a civil trust dispute might generate unwanted calls, the message did not hurt my job. Human Resources documented it and directed all future contact to security. My father mailed me a bill for $27,300. He claimed it represented unreimbursed food, utilities, school supplies, and medical costs from ages 16 through 18. Priya responded with one sentence explaining that parents cannot retroactively invoice a minor for ordinary support. We heard nothing more about the bill. Those attempts helped me stop doubting myself. People who wanted reconciliation would have explained the records. My parents wanted silence, signatures, and a flattering public story. My father still tried to control the story. He emailed relatives saying Carla and I were attacking Sophie because she had finally become successful. My mother posted that some children remember every sacrifice except their parents' sacrifices. I did not argue online. With Priya's approval, Carla and I sent one factual message to close relatives. It stated that a court-ordered accounting had identified undisclosed trust proceeds and that the case concerned beneficiary rights, not sibling jealousy. We attached the public order, not private accusations. Sophie called after reading it. Her voice sounded different. She said, "Dad told me he paid for the house from his retirement bonus." I told her the traced amount. Sophie admitted my parents had asked her to sign a document promising to transfer the house back if anyone challenged the gift. Her own lawyer had told her not to sign. That was the smaller twist my parents had not anticipated. They had not given Sophie unconditional security. They had given her an asset they still expected to control. Mediation lasted 14 hours. Carla had the strongest legal claim. She could have pursued removal of my father as trustee, repayment, fees, and potentially a sale or lien involving the house. None of us wanted Sophie thrown out over decisions she had not made. The final settlement required my parents to pay Carla $238,000 over time, secured by a lien on their own home and retirement assets. My father was removed as trustee and required to cover a large portion of the accounting and legal fees. Sophie kept her house, but it was counted as an advance from the family assets. She signed a separate agreement acknowledging that my parents had no right to reclaim or control it. My claim was settled for $32,500. That included the documented rent, interest, and a contribution toward the student loans I had taken after relying on their written promise. My parents did not admit fraud in my portion, but the payment was real, enforceable, and due before they could make any further gifts. At mediation, my father said, "You have destroyed this family over money." I answered, "The money only proved what the family was already built on." I used the settlement to pay off the remainder of my student loans and put the rest toward a modest townhouse. I did not buy it outright. I made a 20% down payment, signed a normal mortgage, and cried in the empty kitchen because every key in my hand belonged to something I had chosen honestly. Sophie and I did not become instantly close. For several months, she remained angry that I had disrupted her life. Then she started therapy and took a bookkeeping course for her candle business. She later apologized for calling me jealous. I apologized for years of treating her like an extension of our parents instead of a person who had also been controlled differently. My relationship with my parents is now limited to occasional written contact. My mother still sends messages about forgiveness without mentioning repayment or deception. My father has never apologized. He once wrote that I should thank him because charging rent made me successful. I replied that I became successful in spite of the lesson, not because of it, and asked him not to contact me unless he was ready to discuss facts. The blue folder is now in a fireproof box. I kept every receipt, the email, the green ledger, and the final accounting. Not because I plan to fight again, but because those papers remind me that being the dependable child does not mean I must absorb every consequence quietly. My parents gave Sophie a house and expected me to provide the applause. Instead, their gift opened the records they had spent years hiding. Sophie got to keep a home without their control. Carla recovered the inheritance she had been denied. I recovered enough to close the debt they helped create, along with the right to stop calling exploitation a lesson. If your parents charged you rent as a teenager, promised to save it for your future, and then used that money and a hidden inheritance to buy your sibling a house, would you have demanded the accounting too? Or would you have walked away to keep the peace?